Hadiths have a chain of narration, and we can scientifically prove that there's no break in the chain. We have a list of people's names. It goes, he said, she said, he said, she said, right? And she said that Muhammad said.
Mama says that alligators are ornery because they got all them teeth but no toothbrush.
Hey guys, welcome to Ask Truth Apologetics. Today, we get to talk about double standards. So let's define what double standards are according to the Cambridge Dictionary. It defines double standards as a rule or standard of good behavior that unfairly some people are expected to follow or achieve, but other people are not. So, for example, Muslims use double standards when they rely upon Sahih Bukhari to authentically record the sayings of Muhammad, which was recorded and collected by a man named Bukhari or al-Bukhari, who lived in Uzbekistan, which is over 3,000 kilometers away from Mecca and Medina. And also, he didn't begin collecting his hadith until 200 years after the death of Muhammad. So not only did he live 200 years after Muhammad and 3,000 kilometers away from where Muhammad lived, he also relied upon oral tradition to collect his hadith.
Sahih al-Bukhari is the most authentic source of information about Muhammad, peace be upon him. And the gospel of Jesus, peace be upon him, is totally unreliable.
So let's see these double standards at work. Pop quiz, hot shot. Which is more accurate, the written word of eyewitnesses or the oral tradition of men living 200 years and 3,000 kilometers away from an event? Well, of course, any given circumstance ever, everyone would answer that the written words of eyewitnesses are astronomically more accurate than oral tradition coming from 3,000 kilometers away and 200 years after the event. Well, all people except for a group of people who call themselves Muslims. In this particular circumstance, they will of course choose B, which would be hilarious, except they're dead serious.
You don't understand Hadith science.
Hadith science? What's that? The science of Chinese whispers from 3,000 kilometers away and 200 years later? That's funny.
Hadiths have a chain of narration, and we can scientifically prove that there's no break in the chain. We have a list of people's names. It goes, he said, she said, he said, she said, right? And she said that Muhammad said.
Mama says that alligators are ornery because they got all them teeth but no toothbrush.
Well, first of all, it's not that hard to just make up a list of names. And who would even know that beyond, let's say, their great-grandparents? And who would want to put in all that work anyway?
No, we know the names of the mothers of the narrators, and that's how we know it's authentic.
Seriously? If you know the name of someone's mom, that makes them reliable? I know the name of lots of people's moms, and I don't think that they are reliable. Tell me, what else does Mama say? Will she admit that Ben Franklin invented electricity?
That's nonsense. I invented electricity. Ben Franklin is the devil.
So the facts are, there isn't a way to verify anything about the Hadith, right? Nothing was written down for over 200 years. The Bible, on the other hand, is a totally different story, right? So when we call Muslims out on their hypocrisy using double standards, accepting Sahih Bukhari and other Hadith narrations, but rejecting the biographies of Jesus found in the New Testament and the Gospels, we're going to encounter a couple of the following objections from them.
But you don't know who wrote the Gospels. They are anonymous. And there are no eyewitnesses.
And once you show them how wrong they are, they reply,
But there is no original Bible. All you have is copies, copies, copies. No original.
Well, what if a gospel writer admitted in their writing that they were an eyewitness? Would you shut up then?
Yes, and I will even get baptized today if that is true.
Well, the disciple that Jesus loved claimed to be an eyewitness of the crucifixion and was also there at the cross to have a conversation with Jesus.
So this is the disciple who testifies these things and who writes them down. We know that his testimony is true. So sorry, Muslims, the disciple Jesus loved claimed to be an eyewitness, right? You can't logically make that argument anymore, although I'm sure you will continue lying through your teeth, just like your Allah, who, according to himself, is the best of deceivers. Standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple he loved standing there, he said to his mother, "Woman, this is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his house. So Muslims, you know that little argument you use that says,
But nobody was close enough to hear Jesus' words.
well, you can't rightfully use that argument anymore. So the disciple that Jesus loved is John, who's the son of Zebedee, and his brother James, who are also known as the sons of thunder. John lived long enough to write Revelation, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and John was a teacher of Ignatius of Antioch and Polycarp. Oh, by the way, Peter was the teacher of Clement of Rome. And Irenaeus says the following: Then, after the publication of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John the disciple of the Lord, who had even rested on his breast, himself also gave the fourth gospel, which is the Gospel of John, while he was living in Ephesus in Asia. John is also recorded in the book of Acts, where he was present at the Apostolic Council of 51 AD. And guess who else was there? Peter, Paul, and James the Just, who's the brother of Jesus. They were also present. These pillars of the early church are also responsible for writing 1st and 2nd Peter and the Epistle of James. And Paul, he wrote a lot of things like Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1st Thessalonians, 2nd Thessalonians, Ephesians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, and Colossians, and maybe, it's disputed, he wrote Hebrews, right? So we can rightfully understand that those apostles and disciples knew the facts that are presented by John, who was an eyewitness of Jesus, that their writings and testimonies are in line with his teachings. Furthermore, Mark is traditionally understood to be a book written by a man named John Mark, who was the scribe of Peter, and it was traditionally believed that he wrote it under Peter's direction. Luke, the gospel writer of Luke, and he also wrote Acts, from his very first statement in the Gospels proclaims that he interviewed eyewitnesses. So here's what he says. Many have undertaken to compile a narrative about the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as the original eyewitnesses and servants of the word handed them down to us. It also seems good to me, since I have carefully investigated everything from the very first, to write to you an orderly sequence, most honorable Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things about which you have been instructed. Okay, we know that Luke was a traveling companion of Paul's. We read about that in the book of Acts. The result of his understanding rightfully follows that all the writings of the New Testament are the direct result of eyewitness testimony, and here's what's key, with peer-reviewed information presented to, so all of this information was presented to other living eyewitnesses. If some information presented by the authors of the New Testament had been viewed as incorrect, it would have surely been contested. And we have no written document from that time that contests the claims of the eyewitnesses that we read about in the gospel, right? So this is a written chain of transmission from eyewitness testimony, right? It's very well documented. For instance, right, the chain of transmission goes from the Bible authors to Polycarp and Ignatius of Antioch, who were disciples of John. Both of these men have writings attesting to the life of Jesus, which tie directly back to the author of John, who is John. Never mind the fact that Clement of Rome was placed there by Peter, and Paul knew all the men who knew Jesus, and Luke interviewed all those eyewitnesses, and all of the aforementioned men also knew each other personally and had access to the writings of them. So let's look into some of the writings of these apostolic church fathers, like Ignatius. He has 7 surviving letters that all confirm the Gospels. Polycarp also has a surviving letter, and Clement of Rome was a contemporary and familiar with both Polycarp and Ignatius, and he wrote a letter known as First Clement or Corinth, right? So when we examine their timeline, this is what we see. We see on the left-hand side of your screen the birth of Jesus, the birth of John, right? The birth of Clement, who lived to around 95 AD. And I want you guys to pay attention to how these things overlap each other, knowing that these people, there's a chain of written transmission, right? So we see that Clement lived during the time of Jesus and John, and that Ignatius also lived during the time of John and Clement. And then we see Polycarp, who lived during the time of John, Ignatius, and Clement. And by the way, all these people lived at the same time as Luke and Paul and Peter and all of the other apostles, right? So we see that Polycarp dies in 155 AD, who is overlapped by Irenaeus, and he lived during the time of Origen and Tertullian, right? So we have all of these written documents laid out, and this takes us all the way to 254 AD, where we get Constantine, Eusebius, the Council of Nicaea, right? So we have an unbroken chain, written chain of transmission, and this is how we know what happened in the life of Jesus. Here on another timeline, you can see at the top where there's Clement of Rome, and how he overlaps with Ignatius of Antioch, and how he overlaps with Polycarp. Justin Martyr overlaps with them as well. So those are the Apostolic Church Fathers. The Greek Fathers, Irenaeus of Lyons, also overlaps with Polycarp, Ignatius, and Justin Martyr. Clement of Alexandria overlaps with him. Origen of Alexandria overlaps. And then we see Eusebius, Athanasius, Cyril, John, and Cyril of Alexandria, and how their written chain of transmission all overlaps. So what is it that we see? We see that all of these men were familiar with John on a personal level, right? And they all wrote about the life of Jesus relying upon eyewitness testimony, right? And here's another very important fact. They all quote from nearly every single New Testament writing that is still in existence today, right? The testimony of the life and death of Jesus is well documented in the written, not oral, chain of narration, and it is very, very strong. The written word is always superior to oral tradition, right? The fact that these men's testimonies align with outside witness found in the writings of Josephus and Tacitus work to further strengthen the authenticity of their witness, right? So pay attention. John trains Polycarp. Polycarp was a teacher of Irenaeus, and Irenaeus records that Polycarp was a disciple of John, the disciple who Jesus loved. And you can read about this today in the letter written by Irenaeus called Against Heresies. Right? Tertullian also bears witness to confirm that Polycarp was a disciple of John in his letter called The Prescription Against Heretics. Right? So this is what Tertullian says on the matter, right? For this is the manner in which the apostolic churches transmit their registers. As the church of Smyrna, which records that Polycarp was placed therein by John, as also the church of Rome, which makes Clement to have been ordained in like manner by Peter. In exactly the same way, the other churches likewise exhibit their several worthies, whom, as having been appointed by their episcopal places by apostles, they regard as transmitters of the apostolic seed. This is what Tertullian writes. To the Church of Rome claimed that Clement was ordained by Saint Peter, and Saint Jerome tells us that in his time most of the Latins held that Clement was an immediate successor of the apostle Peter. This is what Irenaeus has to say. But Polycarp also was not only instructed by apostles and conversed with many who had seen Christ, but was also by apostles in Asia appointed bishop of the church of Smyrna, whom I also saw in my early youth, for he tarried on earth a very long time, and when a very old man gloriously and most nobly suffered martyrdom, departed his life, having always taught the things which he had learned from the apostles, and which the church has handed down, and which alone are true. To these things all the Asiatic churches testify, as do also those men who have succeeded Polycarp down to the present time.
So, Mr. Muslim, if you're willing to accept Sahih al-Bukhari as an authority when it has Chinese whispers as a oral transmission chain of narration that travels a distance of more than 3,000 kilometers and 200 years, if you're willing to accept that by those standards you must be willing to accept the authenticity of the New Testament, namely the Gospels. So what's it going to be? Are you going to follow through with your promise to go get baptized? Or are you going to pull a Houdini like Allah and pretend that you're going to do it, but then someone else apparently will be put in your place and they'll do it instead? What's it going to be, man?
I see your point. You have proved to me that there was an eyewitness who wrote the gospel, and it was there, the birth of Jesus. I am a man of my word. I will get baptized. Wait. The water is too cold. I don't know if I can do it. What? No. I am a man of my word. I see a two-eyed creature with a shin and two right hands coming for me. Allahu Akbar!